sit down. I mean it. Wherever you happen to be right now, behind the wheel, on a sidewalk, lying in the dark with this playing softly into your ear, find some way to come to a stop. Because the thing I want to talk to you about tonight cannot survive in motion. It only opens when you go still. My name is Walter. I've spent the better part of my life watching people, not from behind glass, not with a clipboard, just the long, ordinary watching that a man does once he's lived enough years to stop being fooled by the surface of things. And of all the patterns I've come to recognize, one stands out clearer than the rest. The most important moments in a person's life almost never arrive with noise. They come in quietly. They wait for stillness. And most people walk right past them because they never slowed down long enough to notice the room had changed around them. There's a line you've probably heard so many times it's gone numb. Be still and know that I am God. It's printed on mugs and stitched onto pillows, and somewhere along the way it became wallpaper. But go back and read what surrounds it in the 46th Psalm. That verse wasn't written in some peaceful garden with birds in the trees. It was written in the middle of collapse. Mountains sliding into the sea, waters roaring, whole kingdoms shaking apart. And right there, in the dead center of all that violence, comes the command. Be still, not as a reward for peace that already arrived, as an instruction shouted while the whole world is still on fire. I think that's exactly where you are, not in peace, in the noise. And something in you keeps waiting for the noise to settle before you'll allow yourself to listen. But that's not how it works. The voice doesn't wait for the storm to pass. It speaks straight into the storm, and it asks you to grow quiet enough to hear it anyway. Let me tell you about something I noticed years ago, because it rearranged how I understand all of this. I had a friend once, I'll leave his name out of it, who simply could not sit in a silent room. If a conversation hit a lull, he filled it. If the house went quiet, on came the television. If his own thoughts started rising to the surface, he'd suddenly find a reason to stand up, make a call, fix something that wasn't broken. For years, I chalked it up to temperament. Restless man, I figured, but much later, after his life had come apart in a few of the ways lives do, he told me the truth of it. He kept the noise running because he was afraid of what he might hear if it ever stopped. Afraid that in the silence, he'd have to face a thing he already knew he was supposed to do and had been running from for 15 years. That stayed with me because I realized something about almost all of us. We don't avoid the voice of God because it's hard to hear. We avoid it because we're terrified we already know what it's going to say. So here's the first thing I want you to sit with. The reason you've been told to sit down, the reason this moment feels heavier than the ones around it, like the air pressure just dropped a notch, isn't that something's about to be demanded of you. It's that something's about to be shown to you. There's a world of difference between those two. A demand drains you. A revelation steadies you. And what's coming toward you now is the second kind. Think about how often, all through the scriptures, a man's life turned not in the middle of action, but in the middle of stillness. Elijah is the one I keep circling back to. Here's a man who had just watched fire fall from heaven on Mount Carmel. One of the most staggering displays of raw power in the whole of the Bible. You'd assume a man who saw that with his own eyes would walk unshakable for the rest of his days. But turn the page. The very next chapter finds him collapsed under a broom tree in the wilderness, begging to die, burned out, hollowed, certain he was the last faithful man alive and that the whole thing had come to nothing. And God doesn't answer him with another spectacle. A great wind comes and tears the mountains apart. And the text tells you plainly, God was not in the wind. Then an earthquake. God was not in the earthquake. Then fire. And God was not in the fire either. And then, after all of it had spent itself, comes what the old translators called a still small voice. Some render it a low whisper. The most literal reading of the Hebrew is stranger and better than both. A sound of thin silence. A sound of thin silence. Sit with that. The God who could call fire down out of an empty sky chose to deliver the most important message of Elijah's life in something so quiet it was nearly indistinguishable from silence itself. Elijah had to go still to catch it. He had to stop performing, stop running, stop dramatizing his own despair, and just stand at the mouth of the cave and listen. I tell you this because I suspect you've been waiting for your own fire on the mountain. The dramatic sign, the unmistakable thunderclap, the moment so obvious that doubt becomes impossible. And maybe, just maybe, that isn't how it's coming to you. Maybe what's been trying to reach you this whole time is the thin silence, patient, low, easy to miss, and entirely real. And it's been waiting on one single thing, for you to sit down. Now let me say something to you directly, because I won't let this drift off into the abstract. If you felt, for as far back as you can remember, slightly out of step with the people around you, if you've sensed you were carrying something you couldn't quite name, a weight that wasn't exactly a burden and wasn't exactly a gift, but lived somewhere in between, I need you to understand this is not a defect in your wiring. There's a word for people like you. It's been worn thin by overuse, but I'll handle it carefully. Set apart. Chosen, if you can stand the harder word. Not chosen as in better than. Chosen in the older, stranger sense. Selected for a purpose you never volunteered for. Marked by something you never asked to carry. And here's what nobody bothers to tell the set-apart ones. Being chosen is lonely long before it is anything else. Look at the pattern and it's impossible to miss. Joseph was chosen, and the first thing his chosenness earned him was a pit, and then a prison cell in a foreign country. Moses was chosen, and he spent 40 years on the backside of a desert tending another man's sheep before that bush ever caught fire. David was anointed king while he was still a boy, then spent years running through caves like a hunted animal while the man he was meant to replace tried to put a spear through him. The mark of the chosen all through Scripture is almost never immediate elevation. It's a long, quiet, often brutal season of being shaped in private before a single thing is revealed in public. So, if your own life has felt like one detour after another, preparation that never seemed to lead anywhere, waiting that slowly wore the edges off your hope, I want you to seriously consider that you were never off the path at all. You were on the only path the chosen are ever given, the hidden one, the road that runs through the wilderness long before it ever reaches the mountain. Let me get personal again. I don't want to talk about this from a comfortable distance. There was a stretch of my own life, I won't tell you exactly when, it isn't important, when nearly everything I'd built came apart at roughly the same time. The work, a relationship, my own sense of who I thought I was, and I did what most men do. I tried to rebuild fast. I hurled myself at solutions. I packed every hour full. I treated the silence like an enemy because the silence was where the grief lived, and I wasn't ready to sit down with grief. It took me close to a year to do the simplest, hardest thing there was, which was to stop, actually stop, to sit in a chair in an empty house in the gray hour before the world woke up and not reach for anything. No phone, no plan, no noise, just sit. And I'll tell you what happened, because it wasn't dramatic, and that is precisely the point. Nothing happened. For days, nothing happened. I sat in the quiet feeling foolish and restless and raw, like my skin was on the outside. And then somewhere in the second or third week of doing this, something shifted. Not a voice, not a vision, just a settling, a sense that underneath all the wreckage there was a floor, and the floor was holding. And it had been holding the entire time. I'd been thrashing so hard for so long that I never once noticed I wasn't actually falling. That's the thing about stillness that almost nobody understands. It doesn't add anything to you. It reveals what was already there. The floor was always beneath me. I just had to stop kicking long enough to feel it under my feet. And I believe, I truly do, that there is a floor beneath you right now that you cannot feel, because you have not yet stopped kicking. The sacred moment that's about to unfold for you is not the arrival of something new from somewhere outside you. It's the recognition of something that's been holding you up this whole time. Through every season, you were certain you were in free fall. Go back to the Gospels with me for a moment. There's a scene in there I find almost unbearable in its tenderness. Jesus is asleep in the back of a fishing boat during a storm so violent that seasoned fishermen, men who'd spent their entire lives on that water and knew its every mood, are convinced they're about to drown. They wake him in a panic, and before he says a word to the wind, he turns to them and asks a question that I think echoes down through the centuries to every one of us. Where is your faith? Notice the order of things. The storm was real. The danger was real. Their fear wasn't irrational, but he was in the boat the entire time. His presence was never conditional on the water going calm. He was right there in the middle of the chaos, asleep, completely at rest, while they were absolutely certain they were alone and doomed. And the lesson he gave them wasn't be braver. It was this: you were never as alone as your panic insisted you were. That's what the noise does to you. The noise tells you you're alone. It tells you it's all riding on your shoulders, that if you stop fighting for even 1 second, the whole thing collapses on top of you. And the invitation to sit down, to be still, is really an invitation to test whether that's even true. To stop and discover that the thing you've been holding up with white knuckles was being held by something far stronger than you the whole time. Now, I want to be honest with you about something, because I'd be doing you no favors at all if I painted this as easy. When you finally do sit down, when you finally get still, the first thing you meet is usually not peace. It's everything you've been outrunning, the grief you never finished, the decision you've been dodging for months, the truth about a relationship you've been pretending isn't the truth, the dream you buried alive because it hurt too much to keep feeding it. Stillness doesn't hand you serenity first. It hands you honesty first, and honesty stings before it ever heals. This is exactly why so many people never reach the sacred moment. They sit down for 30 seconds, The hard things start to rise up out of the quiet, and they bolt. They grab the phone, flip on the noise, fill the silence with anything at all. Anything to put off the reckoning. And believe me, I understand the impulse. I did it for years myself. But I'm telling you, as a man who finally stayed in the chair, on the far side of the honesty is the floor. On the far side of the reckoning is the rest. You have to walk through the first to reach the second. There is no road around it. There's a moment in the life of Jacob that I think about often, and it speaks to this directly. He spent a whole night utterly alone by the river Jabbok, after sending everyone he loved across to the other side. And in that solitude, in that dark, a man came and wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Jacob didn't run from it. He held on. He came out of that night limping for the rest of his life. But he also came out with a new name and a blessing he'd been chasing his whole life through trickery and striving. The thing he'd schemed for, he finally received only when he stopped scheming and simply held on through the hardest, loneliest night of his life. The wound and the blessing came from the very same encounter. They almost always do. The Book of Lamentations, a book of pure grief written in the smoking ashes of a destroyed city, holds one of the most quietly radical instructions in all of Scripture. It says it is good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth, to sit alone and keep silent, to put his mouth in the dust. And then, right there in the middle of all that devastation, almost without warning, the writer pivots. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies are new every morning. He didn't find that hope by escaping the silence. He found it inside the silence. He sat alone in the ashes of everything he'd ever known, kept quiet, let the grief be exactly what it was. And from that precise place, not in spite of it, but because of it, hope surfaced. New every morning. The mercy had been coming all along. He simply had to go still enough, there in the dust, to notice the sun was already coming up over the rubble. So let me bring this in close to you now, right here, in whatever room you happen to be sitting in. This isn't an accident. You arriving at these words at this particular hour of your particular life. I don't believe much of anything arrives by accident for the set apart. You found this, or it found you, at a moment when something in you was already aching to stop. And I want to give you permission, if no one else ever has, to actually do it. Not later, not once the schedule finally clears, not after you've handled the next crisis and the one waiting behind it. Now, in the unresolved middle of all of it, here's what I need you to understand about the sacred moment that's unfolding for you. It will not feel huge in the way that word makes it sound. There will be no fireworks. It will likely feel like the very opposite. Small, quiet, almost too simple to possibly be the thing you've been waiting your whole life for. A loosening somewhere in your chest. A breath that finally goes all the way down for the first time in months. A sense, faint at first and then unmistakable, that you are held, that you were always held, that the weight you've been dragging alone was never yours to carry alone in the first place. And the moment you set it down, you'll wonder why on earth you waited this long. The chosen ones I've known across my life, the genuinely set apart, not the ones who simply liked the sound of the label. They all shared one thing in common. There came a point where every one of them stopped striving for the revelation and simply sat down to receive it, where they stopped, throwing their shoulder against the door, and discovered it had been unlocked the entire time, just waiting for them to quit pushing and turn the handle. The striving was never what opened it. The stillness was. Ruth, in her story, never once clawed her way into her own redemption. There's a strange and beautiful moment in it. After she's done every single thing within her power, when Naomi tells her simply to sit still and wait, to see how the matter will fall. Sit still. After all the loyalty, all the loss, all the long labor in another man's fields, the final instruction before everything turned was that: be still. And it was in that stillness, not in her striving, that the entire course of her life, and through her, a lineage that would run all the way down to David and beyond him to Bethlehem, was set quietly into motion, not by grasping, by waiting, by her willingness to sit down and trust that the matter would fall the way it was always meant to fall. I don't know what your matter is. I don't know what you've been waiting to see drop into place, but I know the instruction hasn't changed. It's the same one it's always been. Sit still, not in resignation, in trust. Not because you've given up, but because you've finally understood that some things will only ever arrive to a person who has stopped grasping after them. So here's what I'd ask of you. Right now, before you stand up and step back into the noise of your life, stay in the chair a little longer than is comfortable, past the point where the restlessness kicks in and your hands start looking for something to hold, past the point where the hard things begin to rise up out of the quiet. Let them rise. Don't run from them. Sit with the discomfort the way you'd sit across the table from an old friend who's finally ready to tell you the truth he's been holding back for years. And listen, not for thunder, not for fire, but for the thin silence running underneath it all, the low whisper, the sound so quiet you could mistake it for nothing, except that it somehow carries more weight than all the noise you've been hiding behind your whole life. It's been waiting for you, patiently. Through every season you spent running from it, it never once stopped waiting. And it isn't angry that you took so long to come back. That's the part people get wrong every time. The voice in the silence is not a voice of accusation. It's a voice of welcome. Like a father who's been sitting out on the porch every single evening, watching the road, and finally catches sight of you coming up the path in the distance, and doesn't ask where you've been, doesn't demand an account of the lost years, just rises out of the chair and opens his arms. That is the moment about to unfold for you. Not a demand, a welcome, not a test you might fail, a homecoming that was settled and decided long before you ever doubted for a second that you belonged. So sit down, be still, and let yourself be found. I want to hear from you on this one, and not some generic word, something real. Tell me about the noise you've been using to hold the silence at bay. What's the thing you're most afraid you'll hear if you finally let it go quiet? Be honest about it. Put it down in the comments, even if you've never once written a word there before. Because sometimes naming the thing out loud, where another set-apart soul might read it and see their own face staring back, is itself the very first act of stillness. I read these, and I think you'll find you are far, far less alone in this than the noise has spent years trying to convince you.